All right, microphone check 1, 2. What is this? This is B. Michael here with Shifting Paradigms Business, and we are live. We're here on KUAW Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom Radio, brought to you by the Black Family Technology Awareness Association here at the W.B. Du Bois Learning Center. I'm actually on location at the house. Got a little temp today, so I'm just, staying away from work, staying away from the studio, but nonetheless, show must go on. And so today, want to just, go over some articles today. I got some things I'm going to do a little different. Going back to my original, pretty much blueprint for what Shifting Paradigms was about. And there were some things I had gotten away from. We're going to bring that in today. We're going to actually just touch on pretty much the economy. We're going to look at what's going on in the economy today. And so we're going to take the time to go over a few articles, look at some developments, and we're going to also, look at some suggestions that can get the people where we need to be collectively. And that's very important. But real quick, Shifting Paradigms. We're all about stimulating critical thought in order to realistically redefine our narrative and positively reshape our reality through dialogue with self-determination. So if there's any comments you want to make, you can definitely type it in the chat box for the listeners. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for those who are viewing. And, again, thank Baba G for holding it up and keeping it down on the soundboard, always doing an excellent job with that. And just, send out some prayers for everybody who may be dealing with some health matters. Today's really just been reflective for me in a way, just the fragility of life sometimes, and there's things that just make us reflect on life and how beautiful life is. And so just want to lift up prayers for those who may be ailing in ways, and pray for what we call in Hebrew, refuah shlema, which is the healing of the soul. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. But here we go. We're going to talk about an article. So I'm going to go ahead and get my share screen going. Shifting Paradigms has a news website. We've been doing it for years, but just bringing it back out. And so it's actually Shifting Paradigms, no vowels.blogspot.com. This is our news website. Then you can also even see our blog spot where we have more writings of myself. And so you can actually tap into that as well. And that's shiftingparadigms.wordpress.com. But here we go. We're going to deal with what's called prophetic views in the news. Prophetic views in the news. And today, the topic is the Great Reset, which equals the New World Order. And as always, I do want to start out with a passage from the book of Ecclesiastes. And I hope that this kind of just frames everything for us, gives us a perspective of what is going on economically and how the economic system is functioning in our day and our time. So, from Ecclesiastes Chapter 5, verses 8 through 16, it reads as follows. It says, "If you see the oppression of the poor and denial of right ruling and righteousness in a province, do not be astonished at the matter, for higher than the high is guarding, and there are higher ones over them, and the increase of the land is for all. The sovereign himself is served from the field. He who loves silver is not satisfied with silver, nor he who loves wealth and increase. That too is futile. With the increase of goods, there is an increase of those consuming them. What advantage then is there to their owners but to look on? Sweet is the sleep of the laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the plenty of the rich does not let him sleep. There is a sickly evil I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner for his evil. But those riches perish through evil use, and he brings forth a son, and there is naught in his hand. As he came naked from his mother's womb, so he returns to go as he came. And from his labor, which goes into his hand, he takes none whatsoever. And this too is a grievous evil. Exactly as he came, so he goes. And what gain has he since he toiled for the wind? Selah. And so we can see here how exploitation, oppression, denial of right ruling and righteousness is nothing to be astonished about. It has taken place from time immemorial, right? But what we can be assured of is there will be a reckoning. There will be a day of reckoning. There will be an account that will be brought forth. And the people will receive justice, but it's a matter of the people actually working together to receive justice, and we'll talk about that. But I do want to go over some of the titles, headlines, before I get into some articles. Just want to read the headlines that I have on the blog spot here. Again, you can see the website right up here, Shifting Paradigms, no vowels.blogspot.com. This is the most recent article here. But we got Great Reset equals the New World Order, okay? And we're going to see what this Great Reset is about and how many of these developed nations, these economic powerhouses are coming together to do an economic reset. But this is all for a matter of globalization. And everything that we're seeing is really for globalization to come about, which is an old paradigm that has been in existence since the days of ancient Babylon, all right? But capitalism is making us all miserable. It's making us all miserable because it's just a consuming, privatizing, exploitative system. And we'll talk about that article. We'll definitely get into that. How government sees control of money. This is important. We need to understand how government sees control of the money. Now, who was in power of the money prior? It was the people. The people were the ones who were in control of the money. And this is when they did what's called minting money. They minted money, but now money is printed. It has no value. It's called fiat dollars. We'll talk about that too. The great narrative and the metaverse. What is going on with this metaverse? You know, we're seeing it in Marvel. We're seeing it in Facebook, new name Meta. So with the Great Reset in the UN resolution prohibiting the glorification of Nazism. A lot of times people think of World War II as the Nazis being defeated. Well, they just went underground. They just went to reorganize. And much like slavery, the enslavement, chattel enslavement here in the United States, it became more sophisticated. The Nazis are much more sophisticated today than they have been in years past. And if you are familiar with the Captain America series from Marvel, the Winter Soldier really tells a very important story historically, using fiction to tell the truth, of course, was Hydra, right? Hydra was a very nefarious organization that infiltrated. And this is where we see Operation Paperclip, you know, coming into the United States. You have NASA. All the alphabet agencies really are a part of Nazism being blended into the United States. Enhancing empire. This is what this really is all coming down to. Imperial pursuits, okay? Rome still rules. We're still under the empire of Caesar, okay? 2,000 plus years, Caesar has been ruling. And we're going to see how this is taking place. There were consequences of abolishing the gold standard. Okay, this goes back to 1913 with, excuse me, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 under President Woodrow Wilson, when they took the dollar off of the standard. So now you have a fiat currency in which dollars are printed. And now every economic inflation, every economic depression is scientifically orchestrated. There's nothing that is done outside of intention, okay? There's no coincidence in this matter at all. There are consequences of abolishing the gold standard. Evil is the root of all fiat money. We're going to take a look at this article. So there's some articles we're going to look at. I'm just giving the headlines right now, but evil is the root of all fiat money. And we're going to see how fiat money, being one based solely in credit, solely in faith, what the people believe the dollar to be worth, has ruled under Bretton Woods. You know, there's a Bretton Woods 2 that's coming out. But again, going back to 1913, this fiat is very, very deceptive. So when fiat currency stops becoming money, we're going to take a look at that as well. The Pandora Papers, this is dealing with where the elite, the billionaires and trillionaires hide their money in offshore accounts. So greed is the reason why we're in Omicron's crosshairs. It's greed, okay? So you see a great shift of wealth. You're seeing the poor get poorer and the rich get richer during this pandemic. There has been a great shift of wealth from the hands of those who have not to those who have, unfortunately. Insiders are dumping stocks left and right. What's going on? Why are they dumping these stocks? Is there something that's on the precipice? Well, the next headline says the IMF is warning of an economic collapse. This is the Great Reset. This is what this is all about. And banks are at a make or break point. This is where we are right now. The banks are at a break or make point. Okay? China in the new Cold War, there are some policies, foreign policies that are coming into place that the Biden administration is putting forth that is putting some very hostile tensions between China, the East and the West, if you will. And we know China has some alignments with their particular nations, the BRICS nations, opposed to NATO, and all these G20 nations as well. So we're looking at a lot of things that are really developing on the geopolitical landscape. Refinancing the climate crisis. So they're doing some refinancing here in terms of really, again, shifting the wealth and just boosting up the debt ceiling. America's well over $40 trillion in debt. Who's that money owed to? With the private bankers. And we'll get into that a little bit. But greenwashing and plutocratic misadventures. Okay, we'll see what is going on with this green movement, how they're exploiting that, and using it like the Nazis did, interestingly, to further their agenda. Okay, this is where Malthusianism comes in, depopulation of society, right? What do they call it? Sustainable development, things of that nature, where you can see that, there is some nefarious things taking place behind the scenes. Industrial nations value capitalism over people. And this is where we are, right? People are used, material is valued, right? So this is where we are today. This is why capitalism is making everyone miserable. The next article headline says why inflation is a runaway freight train. Okay, there's nothing that can be done to stop what is about to come with this bubble, this economic bubble that this administration and the previous administrations before it are printing all this money, increasing the debt ceiling that eventually is going to make the dollar absolutely worthless. Invisible incentives of Bitcoin. So here's some actual diversifications that can take place that can get people out of the dollar and out of this imploding economy to an economy that is run by people, as a matter of fact. DeFi, which is called decentralized finance, is a very, very viable alternative to get out of a system that is headed flames. Cryptocurrencies are growing. Okay, despite this Omicron plunge in the market, crypto coins are actually still growing. There are some hard hits that are taking place, but for the most part, cryptocurrencies are growing. Scientism's road to surfing. Okay, so the people are using science just like they were during enslavement when they had, drapetomania, the diagnosis of enslaved people running away being a condition, pathology, right? And phrenology, where they measured the size of the cranium, which determined if they could actually have certain limitations as humanity. Give me 1 second. Hey, Baba G, could I ask you to push mute? Because I'm picking up your voice is kind of a little throwing me off a little bit. Awesome. There we go. And so, again, scientism's road to serfdom is something that is taking place. Omicron fears and what that's causing in society. Omicron is actually affecting the economy. Millions of Americans are becoming independent of the system. People are going off the grid. People are finding alternative economies. People are going back to bartering. People are understanding the value of collectivism. And this is so important in our day and time. We have to learn to depend on one another. Baba G, if you could push mute, that would be great because I'm picking up your voice in mine and it's kind of throwing me off a little bit. If you could just push mute on yours, that'd be great, Baba G. And then we're going to talk about Inyare and Ujama as we're approaching the observance of Kwanzaa the collective economics of Ujamaa is a very important principle in the 7-day observance. Joseph Nyerere, an African leader back in the 60s who was assassinated, was a big proponent of that particular principle. And then we're going to talk about the economy of the kingdom. So I'm not going to go over all these articles, but we're going to touch base on some of them. Let's start off with capitalism is making us all miserable. This is from the Jacobin magazine. This was written by Luke Savage. And it was printed up on the 29th of November. Again, capitalism is making us all miserable, even the super rich. I'm not going to read the entire article, but we're going to check it out. So capitalism imposes massive suffering on the poor and working class. And this is what goes back to the Ecclesiastes 5 verse. If you see the oppression of the poor, right, don't be astonished at it. This is something that has taken place from time immemorial again. Even the detestable super rich are being made miserable by the sadistic things market competition implores them to do to the rest of us. Last week, The Guardian ran a column entitled, "I'm a Therapist to the Super Rich. They are as miserable as Succession makes out." At face value, the piece, pure clickbait. Textbook example of the kind of headline that tends to drive traffic in the social media. Let me do something. Give me just a moment. Give me 1 second. All right, let's continue on. At face value, this is the piece of pure clickbait. A textbook example of the kind of headline that drives to traffic in a social media economy that thrives on provocation. And sure enough, it's been greeted by an all too predictable deluge of comments expressing a mixture of schadenfreude and lack of sympathy for the exorbitantly wealthy. Let 1,000 quote tweets bloom. But the op-ed penned by Clay Cockrell, a psychotherapist who by chance became a specialist in treating ultra-wealthy individuals and who now finds HBO's Succession closer to documentary than drama, is well worth reading for the flicker of insight it offers into the inner lives of the super rich. And that makes sense that they're miserable because all they have is money. They're so poor that all they have is money. They have nothing else. Their morals are gone. They have no trust. They have no real friends because everything is brought to them in a very exploitative manner. You can't have a clear conscience with that. You cannot, whether it be the climate and nature or whether it be people. The resources are being exploited for the super rich. So just as the headline suggests, many of Cockrell's clients find happiness elusive, despite the unfathomable personal freedom and material comfort that comes from wealth. Having indulged their children, some struggle to be effective parents. They don't have a connection to people. Remember, they value material. This is what prophecy talks about. Prophecy talks about in the end days, people will become lovers of self. People will be exploitative. People will be, more concerned about material than about humanity. It talks about this. So many reportedly have trouble forming non-instrumental or non-transactional relationships. They find it difficult to trust those around them and feel devoid of meaning or purpose in life. They've sold their soul to gain the world. The issue of money itself, meanwhile, is both prickly and uncomfortable. And it's clear from existing research that many wealthy people experience a kind of perpetual status anxiety, rather than the sense of security one might expect. As Cockrell writes, quote, "Money is awkward to talk about. Money is wrapped up in guilt, shame, and fear. There is a perception that money can immunize you against mental health problems, when actually, I believe that wealth can make you and the people closest to you much more susceptible to them," right? Because people look at money, and I'm not saying it's not a defense. It is a defense. It is a big resource. But when people worship money, people make mammon their God, scripture talks about, that's where the problem comes into the forefront. Mammon becomes the end, right? And not the means. But when the end justifies the means, people will do any and everything that they can to acquire that wealth. And that's chasing the wind. And it's causing bloodshed. So that's that article there. I'm not going to read the entire article, just giving you all an insight to it. I'll have this posted up on my blog where you can actually read these articles for yourself in more depth. I'm going to go on to the next article here. We're going to talk about enhancing empire. This is what's going on. They're enhancing empire. They, as in the wealthy, right? The politicians who are the actual puppets of the ruling families you will never see, the black nobility of Europe, right? And there's some other agencies, religious, all the major world religions are in organization-wise, not the people who are a part of the particular organization, but those who control the organization are very diabolical in using religion as an economic political tool to go about expanding empire. We see that that's what Rome did under Emperor Constantine, okay? This is an article from the Internationalist 360. It's called The Summit for Democracy, Enhancing Empire, Not Defending Democracy. This was written on December 1st by Brian Berletic. So, the very first Summit for Democracy will be held in early December 2021. Organized by the United States, it will include leaders from government, civil society, and the private sector, all unilaterally picked by the United States, who, by implication, has unilaterally declared itself arbiter of which nations are deemed democratic, and by process of counting the uninvited, those deemed undemocratic. This is a very, very interesting development here, where the determination of who's considered quote unquote democratic, right, the rule of the people, the majority, which leads to tyranny, in fact, is in the hands solely of the United States of America as relates to this particular summit coming up. US-sponsored opposition movements and nations left uninvited took the opportunity to portray the summit as validation for some and a slap in the face to others. Oppression. Thai PBS, in an article titled Thailand's Exclusion from Global Democracy Summit, a warning sign to Prayut's government, would suggest as much. The article also claims of all the 111 invited countries, including the US, 77 rank as free or fully democratic, according to Freedom's House 2021 report. Another 31 invitees rank as partly free, and 3 countries fall into the not free category. Let me get a sip of this tea. Freedom House, a subsidiary of the US Congress, funded National Endowment for Democracy, or NED, is hardly an objective source of information regarding nations which are free and nations which are not. It only further illustrates the unilateral nature of not only the Summit for Democracy, but the unilateral nature of Western democracy itself, okay, exhibiting and enhancing empire and not discussing democracy. This is all about control. This is all about globalization again. This is all about what we more know of in the conspiracy realm circle as the New World Order, which is a term that's being thrown around by politicians really since Ronald Reagan, but more expressly with his successor, George Bush Sr. The US Department of Official announcement regarding the summit would claim that, quote, leaders will be encouraged to announce specific actions and commitments to meaningful internal reforms and international initiatives that advance the summit's goals. These pledges will include domestic and international initiatives that counter authoritarianism, combat corruption, and promote respect for human rights. But that's typically a veneer to operate under that, right? If you come out and say that you are against that, a lot of times the people who say that they're against it are actually espousing it and promoting and going about carrying it out. Politico, in an article entitled An Illustrative Menu of Options, Biden's Big Democracy Summit is a grab bag of vague ideas. It would also claim that, quote, one somewhat vague initiative the Biden team has discussed launching during the summit is an international alliance to promote internet freedom called the Alliance for the Future of the Internet, according to documents obtained by Politico. U.S. officials have also floated a list of potential commitments other countries can make, such as increasing funds for media literacy programs and enacting export controls on some dual-use technologies. Internet freedom, that's end quote, by the way. Internet freedom and media literacy are euphemisms for increasing Western influence and control over the internet and crowding out both independent alternative voices and state media from nations targeted by the West. Rhetoric aside, the summit will likely focus precisely on this, using terms like democracy, human rights, and anti-corruption as cover for otherwise preserving and reasserting Western primacy, and I will include hegemony, around the globe where it has declined in recent years. The Summit for Democracy at face value alone operates under a questionable premise, one that the US somehow leads democratic nations around the globe to counter authoritarianism, combat corruption, and promote respect for human rights. And we know in this country, those things are hallmarks, right? Authoritarianism is present, corruption is rife, and respect for human rights is pretty much, particularly for some people, cultures, is null and void. And so for a people to have to fight from 1619 to present for recognized, let's say, not even human rights, civil rights, that lets you know that there's a problem. Civil rights, just treat me civilly. Don't even deal with my humanity. Let me just deal with the civil aspect of cordiality, right? Not even being recognized as a human, 3/5 human, right? So you gotta just really put this all into perspective. And how can this country proclaim to be the leader in that when they have no record that shows that they can do any leadership in that? Something to think about. Moving on. Let's deal with this great reset now. What is going on? Well, we'll come back to that. We're going to look at this article here about fiat money. This comes to us from Zero Hedge. This is an article by Tyler Durden, his pen name. Of course, if you know Fight Club, that is who this writer uses that name as. And that was a very, very political movie if you haven't seen it. But this is again from Zero Hedge. And a lot of the articles that I do acquire from the internet are alternative news, people-centered articles, you know, and they're actually quality though, because there's research involved, right? There's investigative journalism involved, and there's sources that they quote to really show that it's just not something that they're making up whimsically. This was actually authored by Egon von Greyers from Gold, Switzerland. Okay, evil is the root of all fiat money. He starts out quoting Ayn Rand. So you think that money is the root of all evil? Have you ever asked what is the root of all money? So, money may be used to be a stable medium of exchange and a store of value. That was in the days when there were sound monetary principles, mostly backed by gold or silver. Since 1913, and especially 1971, under President Ford, there is no discipline and no morals when it comes to the issuing of money, as unlimited amounts of fake or fiat money is printed at will. This is what is called the debt ceiling to go up. And I believe it was Alexander Hamilton, one of the quote unquote founding fathers, who said that bankers pose more threat to the United States than a standing army. If the bankers get control of this country, it will be more of an imposing threat to this country than a standing army. And that's happened. 1913 is when it took place. In today's fiat money world, there is only one answer to Rand's question. What is the root of all money? Namely, evil is the root of all fiat money. On the IMF, the International Monetary Fund website, there's an article stating that, quote, money is something that holds its value. The meeting of bankers and politicians on Jekyll Island in November of 1910 laid the foundations for the Federal Reserve Bank. 3 years later, in 1913, the Fed, which is only federal in name, it's a private entity, was founded. They're about as Federal Express. That's how federal the Federal Reserve is. They're only federal in name. They're not a part of the government. They're private. Because government is public, right? It is a public entity. From that moment on, private bankers were running the US monetary system, including the printing, not the minting, which the US Treasury did, which minted money based on silver and gold, but now the Federal Reserve prints money based on credit. But the British pound, backed by gold until 1931, was the global currency of choice then. The dollar, under the Bretton Woods Agreement, has become now, 1931, the standard of global currency. Here it is, in 1944, excuse me. Currency systems are ephemeral. The Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 established a new currency based on the dollar. From that time, all major currencies were pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar itself was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. The dollar thus became the world's reserve currency, bolstered by big gold reserves. These were accumulated gradually from the early 1900s to the late 1940s. The US received payment in gold during World War II from its sales of arms and other supplies. As the chart below shows, the gold holdings grew from virtually nothing in the early 1900s to 22,000 metric tons by 1947. Over the following 25 years, 14,000 tons were sold. The US gold reserves are now alleged to be only 8,000 tons. The 14,000 tons sold would today be worth a handsome $840 billion, which certainly would have been useful in propping up the ailing finances of the US Treasury. Most of the US gold was sold at a measly $35 per ounce, which tells us that the US made an opportunity loss of $794 billion. They lost it. And the people in charge of the Treasury and the Fed are supposed to be money experts. That wasn't a good deal, right? You sold it for more than you bought it. Well, no, you actually, they lost that. They lost it, right? They lost it. So if you sell it more than you buy it, that is a profit, but it wasn't a capital gain for them when they did that. It was an opportunity loss. This tells us again that they don't understand gold and they don't understand history. They clearly don't understand money either. Those who are controlling money, just like the ones in control of health today, they don't understand it. Still, they are only hired hands and temporary custodians of US gold and the US finances, and never have to directly suffer the consequences of the actions. As Rain said, you can avoid reality, but you can't avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. We're going to end off on that article there. Just pick it up a little later with some other stuff. But we're going to look at how there are consequences to abolishing the gold standard. What are the consequences of that? This is an article that comes to us from International Man by Doug Casey. This article was written by David Stockman. It's called The Consequences of Abolishing the Gold Standard. The author goes on to say, let me expand this a little bit. Before Alan Greenspan fell off the wagon in pursuit of government power, position, praise, and riches, in his 1966 speech, Gold and Economic Freedom, he said the following: in the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. No way to protect it. It's impossible. There is no safe store of value. The financial policy of the welfare state requires that there be no way for the owners of wealth to protect themselves. You're sitting duck. This is the shabby secret of the welfare status tirades against gold. Deficit spending is simply a scheme for the confiscation of wealth. And this is what has happened. This is how the wealth has shifted, right? Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. It protects property rights. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the statist antagonism toward the gold standard. So when Greenspan spoke in 1966, the public debt was just $325 billion and amounted to 40% of the gross domestic production. And that figure had been steadily falling from the World War II peak of 125%. I got some tea, Mom. No more. The public debt now stands at 28.1 trillion. And I think it's more in the 40s of trillions of dollars. 127% of GDP, and is rising at breakneck speed. What happened was that once the Fed's fuel tech boom of the 90s ran out of gas, with the dot-com bust in the spring of 2000, industrial production in the US got pinned to the flat line. During the first period between 1972 and 2000, the Fed's balance sheet grew about 500 billion, or 18 billion per year. During the last 21 years since then, the Fed's balance sheet has soared by 7.6 trillion, or $362 billion per year. When the central bank injects 20 times more fiat credit into the economy each year, it has to go somewhere. As dramatically depicted in this chart below, the stock market became the great monetary dump that absorbed the inflationary tide. You can see how all this is just a staggering dump cash. So the stock market recorded a staggering $38.3 trillion gain in value during the last 25 years. That was well more than double the 14.5 trillion rise of nominal GDP, meaning that the stock market is now capitalized at 200% of national income. And I'm not going to read that anymore, but you can just see the effects of what gold has done, of taking the dollar off the gold standard. It's put people in a very, very precarious position with debt increasing, and how all this is about to just go pop. So this comes to us from the Mises Institute, how government seized control of money, okay? This was written by Ryan McMakin on December 2nd this year. The article says, discussions surrounding of the world's monetary systems today, there is usually one thing almost everyone can agree on, that money should be controlled by the organizations we call states or sovereign states. Those are the people. Nowadays, when we say the US dollar, we mean the currency issued by the US government. When we say the British pound, we mean the money issued by the regime of the United Kingdom. This assumed need to have state-issued money has not always been the reality, of course. Indeed, the history of the rise of the state is a history replete with efforts of states to replace private sector money with state-controlled money. The reasons for this are numerous. Control of the money supply, usually complemented by intervention in the financial sector, allows states much more flexibility in expanding state spending and state borrowing. Perhaps as most importantly, this allows states to spend prodigiously in times of war and other emergencies. So this is where it really has its like boost. And this is what is a major incentive for the people. War is big business, right? Crisis is big business. That's when most people make their fortunes in times of crisis. As we will see, the struggle between the state and private finance has been a long, it took many centuries for regimes to secure the sort of legitimacy and regulatory power necessary to claim a monopoly over money. And even today, states are still somewhat constrained by the realities of international competition between currencies. They are also constrained by the continued existence of quasi-monies that function as stores of value, such as gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies. Perfect segue for the next article coming up. Yet it is impossible to deny that the state has made enormous gains in recent centuries when it comes to taking control of money. The order of these events also reminds us of another important aspect of states and money. The rise of states was not conditional on kings and princes seizing control of the production and regulation of money. Rather, the causation runs in the other directions. As states became more powerful, they used that power to also take control of money. And this is where the corruption and the oppression and the exploitation has its root in power. We're going to move on. We're going to see how there's some incentives to not only Bitcoin, but other cryptocurrencies as an alternative. Okay, this comes to us from Bitcoin Magazine, article entitled The Invisible Incentives of Bitcoin. This was written by Bitcoin Vegan and Dardu Amantana. on December 1st. So what incentives does Bitcoin offer? Money accumulation, or is there any greater purpose and incentive for miners securing the network? Mining is the most important process of the Bitcoin network that relatively few actually understand. I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Marty Bent, the laid-back Philadelphian with the penchant for Bitcoin mining and founder of Tales from the Crypt podcast. He talked about my journey and how I came about writing my book, From Bars to Bitcoin, a coming-of-age story in which prison ushered Bitcoin into my life for the better. I did not need a halfway house when I came home from incarceration because Bitcoin gave me the necessary skills to reintegrate into society at a pace only a book could highlight. During the podcast, a revelation hit me on the real reason behind Bitcoin's incentives. You know, the tangible things that keeps plebs and investors up at night. What incentives does fiat money give society that may sway so many members of society to push morality to the side, even to the extent that they may even commit a crime to obtain it? What are the incentives, right? Looking at the staggering numbers of incarceration in America, it's easy to see that this happens with regularity. The crimes to get these fortunes, as I had mentioned before. Crime pays, and it delivers in fiat at greater levels in Bitcoin. The media may uphold Bitcoin's few cases of cybercrime and its shadowy supercoder founder as something that threatens the security of the reserve currency. The truth is that crimes committed with Bitcoin are few and far between. Bitcoin, in my opinion, gives a more peaceful, inclusive, and better return of honest money as an incentive than anything man has ever seen before. I'm not going to expand on this article. I'm going to go to another article because I want to just kind of go into what cryptocurrencies are doing. I have a few more articles after that as time is drawing near. This is from the Mitchell Republic. Bitcoin currencies, cryptocurrencies continue growing, but Mitchell Bank remains skeptical on the risky investment. Okay, Sam Fosnes writes this on December 3rd. I'll just get to the article. For Stefan Bailey, investing in cryptocurrency has been the wisest financial decision he's ever made. The Mitchell resident recently brought about a penny worth of cryptocurrency and made a little over $50,000 6 months later, right? Bailey is one of about 220 million people who use cryptocurrencies, according to recent figures from a July report on crypto.com. Getting into crypto was hands down the best decision I've ever made with money. I've helped friends get into it. I've watched them build more wealth than they've ever have, said Bailey, who has used his profits from cryptocurrency to help grow his food truck business. Cryptocurrency at its core is a new form of digital money that is decentralized and can be used to buy goods over the internet and exchange money without a bank being involved. Take the bankers out of the equation, right? If we can get these private bankers out of the equation as a people, we can get back to our sovereignty. We can get the land back as well. There's two essential things in food. So three: food, land, and our own resources, financial, our own economy. So while there are thousands of cryptocurrencies and counting, Bitcoin has emerged as the most popular one. Since its inception in 2009, Bitcoin has surged from a penny to around $57,000, right? So we can just look at the growth of that. I'm not going to get into the fullness of this article because our time is running out. But this is why this is taking place. The IMF is warning of an economic collapse. So this is an article here that comes to us from Yahoo News. Heather Scott on December 2nd writes the following. The IMF on Thursday urged advanced economies in the G20 to extend and improve their debt relief initiative. Print more money, please. Print more money. This is that debt relief initiative. Print more money, right? Warning that many countries face a dire crisis without the help. We may see economic collapse in some countries unless G20 creditors, the people who the money is owed to, agree to accelerate debt restructurings and suspend debt service while the restructurings are being negotiated. IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva said in the blog, adding that it is critical private creditors also offer relief. The G20 debt service suspension initiative expires at the end of the year, and without a renewal, countries would face financial pressure and spending cuts just as new COVID-19 variants are spreading and interest rates are expected to rise, she said. Debt challenges are pressing and the need for action is urgent. The recent Omicron variant is a stark reminder that the pandemic will be with us for a while. Georgieva said in the blog co-authored by Sela, that name there, director of the Fund Strategy Policy and Review Department. Georgieva did not specify which economies face the crisis, but simply to low-income countries. Now, anyone who's using a fiat currency right now is in the crosshairs for this economic collapse, because anything that is based on a house of cards will eventually fall. Fiat dollar is nothing more and nothing less than a house of cards. And people are waking up to that. People are very much so waking up to that. And as a result of that, according to this article, shtf.com, where the stuff hit the fan plan, millions of Americans are scrambling to become independent of the system as it collapses all around. This was written originally by Michael Snyder, the Economic Collapse blog. Michael says, once upon a time, all the major institutions in our society were running super smoothly, and most people could rely on the fact that they would always be there when they were needed. But now, things are going haywire everywhere as you turn. We are in the midst of the worst supply chain crisis in our entire history. The crime and violence in our largest urban areas are starting to spiral out of control. Millions upon millions of our fellow citizens are absolutely seething with hate. This pandemic is causing officials to make extremely irrational decisions that would have been unthinkable during normal times. Earlier today, the author says he was horrified to hear that one of his readers had just been denied access to a local hospital. He was taking his wife in for a very important reason, but there were people at the entrance that were checking the vaccination status of everyone that attempted to enter. He and his wife had not been vaccinated, and so they were turned away. That means they will not be able to have access to any services at that hospital for the foreseeable future. Now, this is where Revelation 13 comes into the equation. And I'm not saying it's solely this mark, but it says you will not be able to buy or sell save he that has this mark. Okay, I'm not saying that this is specifically the mark of the beast, because things have led to this for people to accept it. This is a spiritual matter first, where people are spiritually deluded and in the dark, quote unquote, about this matter. And so they receive more of this system, this beast system, to go along with. You got to see this for what it is. Now, people will be like, well, they shouldn't get services anyway because they need to be vaccinated. Well, people have the power to make a choice. This is what freedom is about, right? This is what, quote unquote, a democracy is about. America's not a democracy, it's a republic, where the rule of law is the standard. And the law is the Constitution, not policy, right? Not legislation. In that sense, the supreme law of the land and the state's constitution. Okay, so we can see how all of this is making people be like, you know what, forget it. I'm just gonna do what I need to do and get into my own, okay? And that's something we need to do anyway, okay? I'm gonna go to two more articles and look at this next article that is dealing with a alternative, okay? This article is written by Ahmed Mohideen from the website entitled the New World Journal. It's entitled Nyerere and Ujamaa, okay? We know Joseph Nyerere was an African leader, and he definitely put the country that he was presiding over on the map by bringing it out of colonialism and into a renaissance of culture and socioeconomic prowess. The case against capitalism. Why this strong antipathy toward capitalism? Why is Nyerere against individualism and personal material accumulation? Individualism and personal material accumulation, right? Nyerere's views on capitalism and individualism are rooted in both ethical and empirical postulates, right? Ethics. There's no ethics in capitalism, really, when you get to it. They can dump all kinds of pollutants in the water. They can release all kinds of toxins into the sky with these smokestacks and stuff, right? They can experiment on people and put toxic products into the food chain. That's all what capitalism does for the sake of profit. He argues that the purpose of production is consumption and not accumulation. Yet consumption not confined to the fortunate few, but the entire community. Capitalism went wrong, Nyare contends, because it divorced wealth from its true power to satisfy very simple needs, the need for food, shelter, and education. Higher income per capita does not mean anything to him if the majority of the people are poor, below or just above subsistence level. Capitalism is wrong because it puts the emphasis in the wrong place. Production, purpose of society is not production. It is to serve man. Society exists for man, not vice versa. Like Marx and Nyare contends, and production is not the primary purpose of society. It is only a necessary condition for a true human life. I just wanted to kind of just throw that out there just to present this information. I want to get to this last article, then I have a passage I want to read to close out as we wrap this up. This comes to us from Marketplace Leadership. It's talked about the economy of the kingdom. Of course, the kingdom being that of Israel, as the scriptures reveal what a true kingdom based on justice, righteousness, truth, mercy, compassion, equity is all about. This is an article written excuse me, by Paul Cooney. He says the kingdom, I know as Elohim, the kingdom of Elohim is a governmental system. I've been saying this throughout Shifting Paradigms. It is a political entity. It is not a religion. It is a governmental entity. Like all governmental systems, it has systems of economics, commerce, and justice, as well as ministry. These systems represent the most dominant spiritual and moral forces on, on the earth. Our understanding of how the kingdom functions in the 21st century is expanding. Nowhere is this expanding understanding more significant than in Elohim's system of economics. We have been well schooled about the economics of tithes and offerings, and we can look at Joseph Smith and how capitalism all started, right? You can look at Marx and see how communism goes on and just socialist democracy, so on and so forth. I personally look at theocratic anarchism, self-governance, right, as under the sovereignty of the Most High as a true system of how we are to exist. And anarchy is not chaos, it's self-governance, right? However, we are all growing in our understanding of this vast, comprehensive system of economics that Elohim established to bring blessing to entire nations. This system, when applied with the right heart motive, will produce the blessing that enables us to live in a culture of generosity. This revelation is not something new, but rather a restoration of a system of economics Elohim gave to Moses. As we see nations in crisis, know that Elohim is allowing a worldly system to crumble. This is why everything is going haywire, because it has to unfold prophetically in order for the kingdom to be made manifest, right? He's allowing worldly systems to crumble while he is establishing his system, the kingdom of economics. What's the relevance of this? You may be saying the Bible has no relevance to our present day life. Elohim doesn't care about economics. He only cares about what happens in church. Consider that in the Torah, the first 5 books of the scriptures, Elohim established the government of a nation that was non-existent at the time, a government that would receive his blessing. He told how leaders were to govern, the qualifications necessary for appointment as a judge, how small business was to be conducted, lending procedures, the list goes on. I'm gonna come down to practical application. How does this all apply in our day? Elohim has established a covenant with his people, both Israelite and Gentile, right? That is unshakable. As you and I pursue knowing Elohim and understanding his ways as he has revealed them in scripture, we position ourselves for the wisdom and insight in the worlds of commerce and government. Moses said these profound words in Exodus 33, 15, and 16. Quote, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here. For how then can it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? It is not by your going, is it not by your going with us, so that we, I and your people, may be distinguished from all other people who are on the face of the earth. Elohim's presence will enable you to operate on a higher level than your peers because of his wisdom, his insight, his understanding, and his authority through you. You have to manifest this as you become the word made flesh as well. You will make better decisions, display better judgment, and learn to recognize and walk in his favor as you come to know the Most High. The economic system of the kingdom is one I choose to live by. How about you? And what's so beautiful is that the scriptures give us a glimpse back in the first century of what this economy looked like. And this is where the trust of the Most High comes into it. And when he rules over you and everyone in your hearts, well, this is how this can function. Okay? Collective economics, Ujama is what is known as in Swahili, right? And Ujima is cooperative work and responsibility. Okay. So this is from the book of Acts, chapter 4, verses 32 through 37. It says, and the group of those who believed were of one heart and one being, right? They had everything in common. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, right? They weren't privatized. They weren't capitalists. Let's just be clear. They were not capitalists, but they had all in common, okay? And with great power, the emissaries gave witness to the resurrection of the Master Yahushua, the new humanity. This is what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a new humanity, a higher form of consciousness. Resurrection suggests that, right? You're now dealing with a heavenly man, not just some earthly, terrestrial, selfish, individualized, cynical person. You're dealing with someone who functions on a higher level. So again, with great power, the emissaries gave witness to the resurrection of the Master Yahushua, and great favor was upon them all. For there was not anyone needy among them. That's what the kingdom guarantees. If you follow the commandments, the laws, the right rulings, and the Torah of Yah, there will be no gaps in society. No one among them had a need. There was not anyone needy among them. For all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them and brought the prices of what was sold and laid them at the feet of the emissaries, right, who were responsible for that. This is a direct democracy, if you will. Everybody was engaged in the process. Gaddafi's Green Book, if you haven't read that, I do suggest you check that book out, because Libya was a cold country before the West decimated. Gaddafi had that country on point. Yes, he was strict because he was trying to keep justice in his country. He was trying to keep peace in his country, and it was very peaceful prior to his decimation. In the Green Book. So we'll go back. There was not anyone needy among them, for all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them and brought the prices of what was sold and laid it at the feet of the emissaries, and they distributed to each as anyone had need. And Yosef, who was also called Barnabas by the emissaries, which means son of encouragement, a Levite, natives of Cyprus, having land, sold it and brought the proceeds and laid it at the feet of the emissaries. Selah. That's from the book of Acts, chapter 4, verses 32 through 37. So we have a choice to make, people. We can look at capitalism and understand iPhones, right? Me, right? We can understand all these personalized, privatized efforts, and we can actually continue to further create schisms in society and make the breach between the haves and have-nots widen, which increases crime, or we can understand how to take care of one another as human beings economically, which just means how you manage your house. How do you manage your house? If your child is hungry, you're going to feed your child, right? We have to get out of this selfish approach to things and get to a selfless approach. We have to come to a higher consciousness. We have to and bringing this all together here at the W.B. Du Bois Learning Center. Be back in 2 weeks with another show. I may have some guests next time, but we'll definitely keep it moving and move forward and continue to bring you all information to stimulate critical thought, to redefine our reality, and redefine our narrative and reshape our reality for the good. This is B. Michael signing off. Peace and power. Shalom, shalom. Much love to everybody.